Hello, family. Welcome back to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. We're here every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Time on Facebook and YouTube, multiple platforms, bringing you information to make the best healthcare decisions for you, your family, and your community. We don't deal in misinformation and speculation. We really look for evidence. We love science, we love data, and we want to make sure that you have the right information so that you can make healthcare decisions. And there are a lot of them to make right now. I mean, we're talking about our immunity, we're talking about COVID-19, we're talking about the vaccine. I know you have a lot of questions, so please queue them up right now. Start typing in. If you're new to the audience, welcome. Thanks for joining us. On Facebook, please make sure you hit like. And if you're on YouTube, please make sure you hit subscribe. And we'd love if you could start typing in your questions that you've been getting together all week. We have a wonderful guest. You know, I told you on my Facebook page, we're going to talk about mental health tonight. There's been so much going on, and we're going to get into it. We have a very special guest, Dr. Karen Felder-Moore, who's a licensed mental health counselor, who's going to help us through that discussion. But first, before we get to that, we're going to do what we always start with, which is the numbers. Where are we with the coronavirus pandemic? Well, unfortunately, we have been full speed ahead, it seems, ever since November, getting more and more cases and more deaths. Right now, we've exceeded 23 million cases of coronavirus in this country. We've reached over 380,000 deaths in this country, and it's over 1 million worldwide. The good news is that we've had 13 million people recover, and a new number that I'm going to start to give you is how many people have been vaccinated. We now know that 9 million people have gotten their first dose of vaccine, and a little over 155,000 have gotten both doses. And of course, those are mainly going to be healthcare workers. And, to help me with my weekly update, I have my producers, Mr. Wayne Bruce and Miss Lila Mays. They're going to come into the studio, and we're going to walk through the weekly update with you.
We're
They have a
here.
bunch of
Hey y'all.
questions.
Hey,
Hi.
hey, hey.
Hey,
What's
hey.
going on?
Happy New Year, everybody. I missed you last week, but I'm back.
Mm, yeah.
Well, welcome. I know y'all have some questions about what's been happening this past week, so
I do. I'm gonna
let's
jump
get
in
to
here,
them.
Dr. Mill.
All right.
So one of the biggest things is what does the rationing of healthcare look like, particularly for Black people? And so I'm in Los Angeles, and last Tuesday, well, maybe even further back than that, but there were some articles that popped up that have popped up recently about
Mm-hmm.
ambulance crews in Los Angeles not giving. They've been given orders to not transport people who will not make it.
Yes.
Um, so what is that's just one example of what that looks like. What other kinds of things does
Yeah,
that mean for people of color?
and it's scary, and it's not just LA, it's Houston, it's hospitals in Arizona where they're having to ration care and make tough decisions because so many people are overwhelming the resources of the system. They're running out of things like oxygen, out of beds, out of ventilators. And just like you said, that article in LA about ambulance crews being told, look, if your patient doesn't look like they're going to make it and you're trying to revive them and they're not going to make it, don't even bring them to overwhelmed hospitals
Right.
because we're not going to be able to accommodate them. Now, my colleagues in the healthcare profession are overworked, stressed, and well-meaning in the care that they give. But what this means for people of color is something that I'm going to take and put out there as a warning to all Black and brown people. If you think that bias does not come into the decision making when it comes to rationing this care, you're sorely mistaken. It's human nature almost to identify with people who remind you of your mother, remind you of your brother, remind you of your grandma. And unfortunately, that unconscious bias comes into decision making. And in this racialized society that we live in, unfortunately, where black and brown lives are devalued, it's folly to think that you're not going to encounter somebody in the healthcare system who might devalue your life as a person of color. And I'm not just sort of alleging this, it's actually backed up by the medical literature. There's a lower quality of care and life saving treatments given to people of color. It's been documented as far as kidney transplants, heart catheterizations, which are a life saving procedure after you've had a heart attack, and even giving pain medicine. There's just a disparity in those kinds of treatments. So, again, most members, the overwhelming number of members of my profession are well meaning, but I want to use this, like I said, to ensure that you know that you should be doing everything you can to flatten the curve, to avoid getting COVID, to avoid having you or your loved ones who you might pass it on to end up in the hospital, to that might again stress the system and make you be potentially subject to bias in these cases where there's healthcare rationing going on.
Right. And before Wayne asks his question next, I just want to say, living in Los Angeles, I'm actually witnessing, behaviors that are not contributing to flattening the curve in real time in our community. And so I
Yeah.
think it's really important to highlight that if we think that, if we know that there are disparities in healthcare, we have got to do our part. I mean, I'm driving by neighborhoods where there are all these gatherings that almost look like festivals. It's just
Yes.
out of control. And so, what's alarming beyond just the number of people who are packed into these spaces is there aren't any law enforcement coming around saying you're not supposed to be out here doing that. There's nobody patrolling or policing that behavior. We have to police ourselves.
We absolutely do. And if the statistic that 1 in 800 black people have died, and a similar number of Hispanic people and Native American people, if that isn't enough, like I said,
Yeah.
please take it to heart that if you do end up in a system where the system is stressed, that you might be subject to bias. And I would hate for that to happen.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I another part of the update um, for question two is everybody's talking about these variants. Now it's a new Japanese variant, and it's a new Chinese variant, and we heard about the UK variant. And since 9 million people have been vaccinated, do the vaccines guard against the variant?
That's a great question that everybody's been asking, and they actually put it to the test. In a lab at University of Texas, they actually produced the variants, the UK and the South African variants, in the lab, and then they took blood from people who had received the Pfizer vaccine to test those antibodies to see if they worked against that variant, and lo and behold, they did. Now, they did it in 20 people, which is a small number, but it was enough to give us hope that yes, these variants will be addressed by the current vaccines that are out right now.
All right.
I hadn't heard about the Japanese variant, but
Yes. Just
okay.
read hot off the
Hot off
presses.
the presses.
Oh,
Hot
oh,
off the
okay. All right.
presses.
That's how I missed
I
it.
I
Okay.
I have looked at it today. I also let me if I can interrupt you, jump you, Lila. Uh,
Uh-huh.
just I've heard about 3 people in the past week who've either been exposed or tested positive for COVID-19. People are close to me, and actually 4 if you include the Congresswoman. But I want to know. I want you to reiterate. What do you do if you've been exposed?
Yeah, and not enough people. When I listen to the media and social media, or even things that you read, not enough people are emphasizing it. So I understand that people don't clearly understand what you're supposed to do. What does isolate mean? What does quarantine mean? So if you've been exposed from the day that you're exposed to COVID, if you know the day, or the day you develop symptoms, you're supposed to quarantine for 10 days. If you get a negative test in that period of time, that's not enough to then say I'm fine. It's still 7 days from the negative test. So, what does that actually mean? What does isolate quarantine mean? It means stay home. If you have a doctor's appointment that you already had scheduled for something non urgent, reschedule it. If you have a hair appointment, reschedule it. If you need groceries, use Instacart. Don't go to choir rehearsal, use Zoom. Stay home. I know people in these actual instances that I brought up that felt that it was okay to go out and do these activities. But it doesn't matter if you feel okay. It doesn't matter if you had a negative test. If you go out, you're going to be spreading coronavirus. We already have 4,000 people dying each day. We got to get it together. We got to be clear on what we have to do when we've been exposed.
All right.
All right. So we know last week there was a major super spreader event. It's not funny at all at the
Not
Capitol.
not at
Yeah.
all.
Um, and so what it really meant inside was people were hiding under desks and, sheltering in place and all of that, lots of whom did not have any PPE, right? And
Yeah.
there was one woman there who actually was trying to hand out masks and like get people to cover their face, sis. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and we'll get into that. I know you'll get into that, Dr. Mill, a little bit later.
Yeah.
But what, what, what was she? If they had followed her lead and taken these masks, what does that mean? What could it have
Well,
meant?
the thing is with, and the Capitol physician came out and warned that this could be a super spreader event because you
Hmm.
had people crammed into a room and many of them not wearing masks. And okay, you could give them a pass. They have been traumatized. But when this Democratic Congresswoman from Delaware started to try to hand out masks to people, they refused. So they
Right,
really don't, you can't give them a pass because they were actually given a mask to wear. And the concern is because they were in a small, cramped quarters with no mask, no PPE on. We know actually one person who subsequently on Wednesday, late Wednesday, it turned out is positive for COVID
right.
19.
All right.
So we know that there is a potential for a super spreader event to happen, and this is not wouldn't just be a regular super spreader event if there is such a
Hmm.
thing. This is the leadership of our country.
Right.
If all of them go down with coronavirus, we have a serious situation on our hands. So I pray that somehow they will be protected. If they do get coronavirus, get the infection, that it'll be mild or asymptomatic, that they'll quarantine and not spread it any further.
Wow.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So, um, there's so much to talk about
there's
this week.
there's a lot.
I
It is.
mean,
There's been a
I
lot
It's a
mean,
going on.
lot.
just
It's a
just
lot.
just the whole just the whole. I mean, what happened at the Capitol is enough to
Yeah.
have a show on.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about that with Dr. Felder Moore in terms of what effect that has on our psyche and how we
Yeah.
can protect against it. We're
Okay.
going to get to that.
So we usually do a weekly debunk, and I usually put up the graphics and everything, but I get I have something even better. Let's do it live. Let's do it live. Let's do it live. It's gonna be
Okay.
funny. It's gonna be funny. You'll hear how I go through the voice, and I generally have it all in in the graphics. But here's the it goes something like this: the weekly debunk, stamping out misinformation in its tracks, and it goes to Lila. What did you
The
hear?
vax. This is what I heard, Dr. Mill. The vaccine is a weapon developed by the military, specifically the one that is Operation Warp Speed. That's to take out black people and people of color because of overpopulation and depopulation of the Europeans. Dr. Mill, is that true?
No, that is not true.
It doesn't.
And see.
However, I can understand why we as black people have concerns about our government and its intentions to us. I mean, it goes back historically, and we don't even need to reiterate the Tuskegee experiment and forced sterilization and slavery and everything that our government has endorsed that has happened to us. And it also goes to currently the things that I've talked about, our own experiences with the healthcare system that have sometimes seemed to devalue us. So I get it. I get where it comes from. And then on top of that, you have how the virus and the response to the virus and the development of the vaccine has been politicized by the current administration. You have the terrible name of Operation Warp Speed that implies speed over safety. I get all of that. But the thing to keep in mind is if the government doesn't need to develop something to kill us, because the coronavirus is doing a great job all by itself. The death rate for African Americans is 3 times that of Caucasian Americans. So the government doesn't need to do anything else to help the coronavirus. The other thing is, yes, Operation Warp Speed funding did go to some companies to develop the vaccine. However, Pfizer did not take any Warp Speed money. And then finally, the speed within Warp Speed also is a misnomer because the work had predated the Trump administration by 10 years in terms of the platform that's being used to deliver the vaccine and the virus mRNA to the body. We talked about what mRNA was last week. It's the instructions that your cell gets from the virus to make more virus. M stands for messenger. So that messenger RNA is something that our own body makes within our cells to instruct our cells what to make in terms of what our own body needs, the proteins that our body needs. So messenger RNA is something that our body gets exposed to anyway. So all it being sort of the boogeyman in this as something that can kill us is actually ridiculous because it's something that if you get a regular virus infection, the cold has its own messenger RNA that it brings into your body when you get infected with the cold virus, and your body has its own messenger RNA, like I said. So it's not true at all that this was developed to kill us.
Well, since we're at the debunk part of the show, we have several more debunks because I saw a video over the weekend, and I don't want to say who put it out. If you Google videos about the vaccine and what it's going to do to black people or just people in general, there were several takeaways from that I got, and one of them, they just kept pushing this whole thing about Bill Gates and Oprah.
And Oprah.
And Oprah. It's always Bill Gates and Oprah or Bill Gates and Fauci.
And you're right. It is always them. And that actually comes from Russian bots and trolls that we've talked about on this show in the past as researched at University of Maryland that use those same boogeymen, Gates and Oprah and Hillary Clinton. They use that to scare people into not taking the flu vaccine. And then when COVID came around, they just substituted Fauci's name for Clinton. So these are old tactics that have been repurposed now to try to scare people not to take the coronavirus vaccine. The other thing, I saw that same video that you're talking about, Wayne. The other thing is that they wanted that the people were alleging that it seems so suspicious that they're pushing black people to the front of the line and having black people take it first. Well, that's not true. Everybody is being offered this vaccine, and it's based on risk, not race. Right. So, so healthcare workers are at the front of the line. They're 1A. And included in 1A are staff that work in long-term care facilities with older people and the people that live there, our seniors that live there.
So 1A being the phases, right, Dr. Mill?
Yes.
1A is the first phase. Yeah.
Exactly. Those are the first people to get it. The 1B is the second phase. Those are going to be your frontline healthcare workers, your teachers, your policemen, your utility workers, your grocery workers, food handlers. And then 1C are going to be those seniors who are 65 and older, who are community dwellers. They don't live in a long-term care facility, and also people who have underlying chronic diseases. And then after you pass those phases, then it goes on to everybody else. There's no race in there.
Right.
So there is nobody singling out black people to go first at all.
Uh, there's a race. It's a race to get the shot. There is a race.
Yeah,
There's a race in there.
and white people with money are racing to the front to try to get it. And so all the people who are turning it down, there are people who are going to get it instead. And unfortunately, if it's going to be members of the white community, that means their small businesses are going to
Yep.
open back up first. Their children are going to get to go to school first. They're going to get to go on vacations and travel around the world first. Whereas black people who are choosing not to take it are going to kind of be stuck, still getting coronavirus, still passing it through our community, and unfortunately, as we've seen, still disproportionately dying. I really don't want that to happen.
Wow. Yeah. Also, last thing for me in that report, and I know we have to get to Dr. Moore, is it mentioned that if I just ate navy beans,
Lots and lots of navy beans.
lots of navy beans, I would be fine
As a man,
as a
As a
man.
man.
as a man, because it boosts testosterone and strengthens your immunity.
I'm just saying this. If I eat a lot of navy beans, my
Okay.
wife
All right.
could be in
All
trouble.
right. Co-producer. Yes.
All right.
Let's keep it
Okay,
cute.
let's stick to the subject.
Okay.
So, there's nothing wrong with maximizing your health and maximizing your immunity. I talk about the 5 self-health actions
All the time.
all the time.
Yes.
And it's beyond nutrition, although nutrition is the bedrock, and making sure you have enough vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc in your diet. And beyond that, it's also getting enough sleep, drinking enough water every day, getting enough movement and exercise, and making sure that your levels of stress, hormones, are under control by practices that you do every day to not feel overwhelmed by life. But the thing is, even with all these things, it has not been studied that having a quote unquote strong immune system protects you against coronavirus. We hope that that's the case, but we don't know that it's true. And for some people, they can't do those things for whatever reason. Maybe they don't know about them. Maybe they can't afford to do them. Maybe they don't put the time in their life to do them. So they're still going to be vulnerable. But we do know that vaccines have been shown to be effective in building your immunity specific against COVID-19. And so an analogy I want to give is people that have diabetes. We've told a lot of people who have diabetes or heart disease, work on your diet. Get enough sleep, all the 5 self-health actions. But for a lot of people, that's tough. So what if I just said, okay, well, do that. We're not going to give you insulin, right?
Wow.
People would die. It's the exact same thing. You can't tell people, well, just go boost your immunity, go eat navy beans, you'll be fine, and don't take the vaccine. It makes no sense.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So, look, Dr. Mel, you have
Yes.
an incredible guest, and we have a lot of questions that are popping up. So, let's get you to your guest.
All right. Well, like I said, we're going to be doing a mental health check-in tonight. And let me just thank my co-producers for those wonderful questions and getting us through the debunk. I so much like to do it that way and have them because they bring just a certain pizzazz.
It's Lyra
So-
Mays down there.
There you go. But we're going to do a mental health check-in because this has been a hell of a week. We all thought that, on New Year's Day 2021, we're turning the page on a new beginning and we were leaving all the chaos and confusion of 2020 behind. That may have been a little Pollyanna-ish, but I think a lot of people believed it. And then we saw the events unfold at the Capitol this week. And, there was a lot of talk on social media about how that's not our fight and it shouldn't bother us. But also this past week, we also heard that the police who shot Jacob Blake were not going to get charged. We also heard about the black woman doctor on YouTube who succumbed to coronavirus, but she was talking about how she was treated poorly and not given adequate pain medicine in the hospital. We also heard about that New York woman who finally got arrested for assaulting the teenager, but many, many, many days passed before she got arrested. And what is the sum total of all those messages? I think they can be taken that they are reminding us about the devaluation of black lives and the fact that consequences for actions like storming the Capitol are very different if you're black versus if you're white. And it can make some people feel a certain kind of way. It can have effects on our health. For example, there's a study that I talk about a lot that involved black men and looking at their DNA, the end caps of the DNA called telomeres, which when the DNA divides, those telomeres whittle down, and it's a sign of aging. But it shows that black men who are exposed to racism and internalize that exposure and make it affect their self-image, that DNA degrades quicker. Those telomeres degrade quicker than black men who are exposed to racism but don't internalize it. And so when I've seen all these things happening and wondering about the effect on the black community and its mental health, I said, look, we really need to have a show about this because we need to talk about how not to internalize the things that are happening to us. And so I am pleased and just joyful to be joined by Dr. Karen Felder Moore. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor. She has her master's in pastoral counseling in the context of community mental health, and she also has a doctorate in counselor education and supervision. So she has a private practice, she works with teens, she works with couples and families, and she also supervises new counseling graduates. So, Dr. Felder Moore, welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So you heard all the things that I kind of ran down there in terms of concerns about how people are processing the events that we see so often on the news and on social media. What are you seeing in your practice? How are you seeing any of these things potentially expressed by your patients when they come in for counseling?
Mhm. Well, thanks to COVID, uh, a lot of the practice is telehealth. And
Mm-hmm.
so let me start there. That means there's been a decrease actually in access to mental health care. Um, Either people do not have the technology, the equipment um, to be able to log on and seek therapy. They lost their jobs and income, and so do not have insurance benefits. It's just a trickle, ripple, compounded effect. But the ones, my clients who are exempt from that would be the young adults that I see because their healthcare uh, is paid for. And so it's different by generation. My young people, let's say 16 to 24, 25, have a different perspective on racism. Um, um, they articulate it differently.
Mm-hmm.
They can identify with the young Black people who have been unarmed and murdered. And so there's a lot of anger in the room, confusion, frustration, and feeling helpless. So with the young men, there's the anger and depression. With the women, there's anger, but more of the hopelessness seen, and just helping them to process that. With older generations, Gen X, baby boomers, and even older, it's just different, and I think the generations help to kind of compartmentalize how each segment is digesting what's going
Mm-hmm.
on in our society. Um, and for our older seniors, I think they're not surprised. They're hurt. They're not surprised. But again, technology, they're in their 80s. So logging on to for a telehealth session
Yeah.
is not effective. And they're kind of being left out of the access to support in that way.
I've seen a lot of comments from people, say 75, 70, 75 and up,
Mhm.
who it almost brings on a sort of a post traumatic stress syndrome, but
Sure.
having lived through the civil rights movement and Jim Crow, which people who are Gen X and younger didn't experience. So I think it's interesting that you say that there is a generational component because it makes perfect sense.
Right.
Have you heard anything like that?
I have, not necessarily in the counseling room, but in groups. So just trying to find ways to support people in the community by offering just online support, debriefing. Of course, we didn't know COVID would go on indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
And so the groups became needed, much needed. And I find that probably 60 and over would prefer to discuss issues like racial trauma or being traumatized or PTSD in the context of the group, not
Mm-hmm.
in their one-on-one sessions. The one-on-one sessions and couple sessions are still pretty much focused on what's going on with me.
Yeah.
I just need
Yeah.
to talk about what's going on in my house.
Yeah.
But for those that are struggling to process, and what do I do with it, and how do I respond at work, and my colleagues are white but not allies, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
toxic, and I don't want to be there, and I'm fine staying at home. I don't ever want to go back to work. What do I
Yeah.
do with that?
I've heard a lot of that too. Yeah.
Those issues are, they seem to be more comfortable when we do just a informal group Zoom session or meet session in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was wondering, you said how people are doing in their homes. Does any of the frustration and the depression get brought into people's relationships within their family, with their spouse, with their kids, with their parents? Does it seem to does all this stress that's coming in from the outside seem to affect those intimate relationships at home?
Yeah. Sadly, in the beginning, I'd probably say from March to about August, there was a significant spike in domestic violence and
Mm.
child abuse, which hurt because the safe places that these families would normally go were not taking
Yeah.
anyone.
Not taking people. Yeah.
And children who would normally be seen and helped at school, someone would have noticed bruising or not having any food to eat, were going unseen. And so we had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of teachers and educators worried about students who they knew
Yeah.
did not have safe environments at home. So, yes, there was an increase in that. I think it was nice in the beginning, maybe, for couples and
Mm-hmm.
families to have some more together time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that quickly. So April was probably the pickup for that. April, May, in the
Mm-hmm.
summer, um, where you normally have that 8 to 10 hour out of the house space, which now everybody was just up under each other
Yep.
all of the time, and you've got to find a way to communicate and form some new routines where everybody still has some alone space. Somebody can go, to their room or to their corner and just have some alone time, as well as learning to um, come up with new activities to do together. So I saw
Right.
the two extremes. Nobody that really settled in the middle. It either went left quick
Mm-hmm.
and in a bad way, or people determined to make the best out of this, and what else can we do.
Right, right. And then you also mentioned too people who don't want to, who have seen what's going on,
Hmm.
have experienced toxic workplaces in the past, and have said, I don't want to go back to work when this pandemic is over. I want to
Right.
continue to work from home. So, how do you help them, again, work through those specific feelings if they do end up having to go back to work, which, I'm sure many of us will end up having to go back to
Go
work?
back to work. Um, well, first, if it was the pandemic or anything else, is name your feelings. So a lot of what I'm doing in therapy, anyways, is teaching clients, helping clients to identify and become more aware of what they are feeling. They're so used to pushing it aside. This is a job I have to go to. This is how I support my family. Suck it up and deal with it. But now that you had no choice but to stay home and find a way around it, you now see it can be done. Either I can work from home, or I've had to pivot, our word for 2020, and find a side hustle or some other type of work that may allow for me to quit what I was doing, or um, alleviate some of the financial stress and pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's learning to identify the feelings.
Right.
A lot of clients have a limited emotional vocabulary. Uh,
Yeah.
and so it's just teaching them that it's okay to feel what you feel. We've got to name it first before we can figure out, is it something you're comfortable with or something you want to change, and then we move in that
Mm-hmm.
direction.
And then once you name it,
Hmm.
when you get to the workplace and you have those interactions with coworkers that, many of us have had that are really irritating and bug us,
Hmm.
or where we're put on the spot where we have to speak for the entire black race in
Right.
our office, what are some of the coping mechanisms that you might help clients work through?
Right. Well, my piggyback or bounce back to one of the terms you mentioned earlier, and that's internalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
So the clients that I have, even myself in one of my client sites, the toxicity in the environment has a lot to do with the microaggression um, in the workplace, and um, clients and colleagues feeling like if I say something, I'll lose my job, or if I'm end up cussing somebody out, get fired from my
Right.
job. So learning how to um, deal with that and manage that. So we're going to name our feelings and be aware of them, and then learn to be assertive rather than aggressive. You can call people on their stuff. They keep jabbing at you because it pushes your buttons and irritates you, and maybe they're trying to get you fired, or maybe they want you to say whatever's going to have to get yourself fired. But being able to name it and call people on their stuff in that moment um, can empower the one who is the victim, or the one who's offended by what's going on in the workplace. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's teaching them to use I statements. When you said X, Y, and Z, I took that to mean, black people don't take care of themselves. You're trying to say that you're spraying behind everywhere I walk, but not where, just call it out right then and there, in a calm way before you allow yourself to take it in, mull it over. She's calling
Mm-hmm.
this, he's saying that, and making it personal, um, when it's really the other person's stuff.
Right.
So we want to name it, stay calm, and use our I statements and being assertive rather than
Mm-hmm.
aggressive.
And I think that's such a key point that you just said, that it's the other people's stuff. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, I've heard from any number of professional people or even kids in school how these kinds of incidences, these microaggressions, can start to erode your self image and your self confidence.
Yeah.
What do you say in that instance?
Um, there's a couple things. When we talk about racial trauma, um, that's one of the ones that falls that, or can be an intergenerational trauma. So because my great grandparents and my grandparents and then my parents going through civil rights, because they experienced certain um, uh, grievances, egregious acts, and witnessed and were jailed um, just for being black, that they have passed on. And even parents today are need to be mindful how they talk around their children and how they behave around their children. And so um, children today can pick up an anxious presentation because that is what's observed in the house. They have a parent who always worries and expresses that worry out loud, or they observe other um, anxious tendencies. And so they learn to respond then in that way. When
Yeah.
there's a stressor, I'm supposed to pace or worry or complain or vent or blame. Um, so the not the fix, but one way to address that then is to, let's say you're the adult and that's how you were raised, and now I'm just here, but you can change it.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with um, there's more of a cognitive behavioral approach, but changing what you think about the situation. And so when
Can you
something,
break down cognitive behavioral approach? Is that what you meant by change how you think about the situation?
right,
Okay.
so if I'm feeling angered by something that just happened in my environment, and I'm noticing that I'm angry, generally the anger, some people are more in touch with um, that feeling of what's
Mm-hmm.
rage building. But if they can take a step back and ask themselves or jot down real quickly, what is my thought in that moment? I took it personally, or they're talking about me. That was a jab at me. I must be a failure. I'm inadequate. Whatever that thought is, identify it, because it has probably become an automatic thought that whenever I'm in a situation that stresses me in that way, that thought is just pops up before you can control it. But once you're aware of it, you can change the thought to something positive and your feelings will
Mm-hmm.
follow. um, so teaching kids though is to allow for time, and corona was a great opportunity to do it all this time we've been home, but allow for
As,
emotional expression. How are you
uh,
feeling? And please don't let them say fine. uh,
yeah.
what is that? But get them to increase
Adults
their,
do that sometimes too, not
they
just
do,
kids.
and it's automatic. But get them to increase their emotional vocabulary when they're upset because the internet connectivity is slow and their game keeps glitching. Okay, how do you feel?
Mm-hmm.
I'm mad. Okay, mad, frustrated, mad, irritated, mad, annoyed. And if they don't know what those are, then you help explain them. So broaden their emotional vocabulary so that they know how to respond. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if it's an annoyance, okay, that's like a 2 out of 10, and I'm going to walk away from this, or I'm going to shut it down and reboot it, and better. But if it's something that enrages them, then you need to teach them. Okay, we might need a longer timeout, and be quiet so that you don't say anything out of that rage, and just teaching them ways to um, react responsibly and in accordance with what they're feeling. The young
Right.
people I work with now, the young adults, go from 0 to 60. Everything, it angers
Mm-hmm.
them. Like they don't
Yeah.
have any emotional regulation. And so we have to teach it
Right.
so that they don't get arrested.
Right.
Excuse me, doctor, I have a question.
Yes.
um, so in managing wellness, one of the questions from the west side from Los Angeles is because there are so many people who are unemployed or their resources have been diminished as a result of the pandemic, what resources are available at a lower cost or for free so they can have some sort of wellness check-ins?
Mhm. Well, community mental health. So if they search for community mental health, they'll find agencies that offer um, free or lower cost sessions that may be limited to a few sessions just so they can service a greater number of people. But community mental health um, is designed and generally in their mission to allow for a sliding scale and a lower cost session. Some of the other positive things that came out of COVID were apps that did have a cost, like Calm, the Calm app, or Headspace, who gave it for free. Calm might still be free, and if it's not, their YouTube channel is. So, um, going over to sites like that, or just searching for stress relief, anxiety management, depression. A lot of the apps offer mindfulness coaching, sleep training, music that you can listen to, visualization, tape recorded mindfulness exercises to help you learn to reduce. And then there's a lot of audio books that are out as well. Um, if you're learning to kind of change your mindset, or if you want to learn about mindfulness, um, yeah, I could go on, and I
Yeah,
can send Dr. Mel a list of resources
that'd be great.
that are books, websites, apps that have been free during this time, that you can look into based on probably what you're identifying as your main concern or issue.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
But
doctor.
before we get to that, I would also like to add the Boris Henson Foundation, Taraji P. Henson's foundation
Mhm.
that she established to honor her dad. They were offering 5 free mental health sessions, and they're accepting donations so that they can continue to do that. So if you got money to give, that's a good place to give it. And then if you also want to see if they have free services still, you could do that as well.
Excuse me, doctor. We have a question coming from Ronald Pritchard. Good evening, Dr. Clarke and panel. My question: why are there two series of shots instead of just one? And I guess he's referring to the vaccine.
Okay. So we'll take a mental health break and talk about that for a second. The reason why there are two is because for some delivery systems like the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, they require a booster, a second shot, to ensure that your immune system has been adequately prepared. Other delivery systems like the one that Johnson & Johnson is working on, which has not yet been approved, but the mechanism is different. It only requires one shot. It doesn't need multiple shots to increase the immune system readiness for the coronavirus. Um, and I wanted to just come back to mental health for a moment. Um, it really strikes me, as we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and all the different sort of strategies that you outlined, mental illness, I think, has been so stigmatized, and people feel that, oh, if I go for help and I go to get mental help, that I will be labeled as crazy or I'll be stigmatized. But what you described is very different. How would you describe the difference between, the public's sort of stigmatized version of mental illness and mental health?
Sure. And I think there's a lot more education that needs to be done because of the miseducation, and especially in the Black community, and perhaps even Brown communities, seeking psychological services has been stigmatized and labeled, you must be crazy, or like just growing up, everybody had the crazy uncle, like everything's referred to as crazy,
Mm-hmm.
versus taking a wellness approach, period. And that teaching all of us that we should value our physical health and our mental and emotional health and our spiritual health, that these should be self care practices, period. Um, Everyone will experience a gamut of emotions: anxiety, stress, depression. Um, and so they are normal grief, they're normal emotional responses to life. And then, of course, when they extend past a 2 week period or a certain time frame, or um, move into where we would diagnose mental illness, then that's different. But as far as mental health, I would like to see it be something that everyone values as they do their physical um, and spiritual health as well.
Yes. And someone just flashed up that illness, the word illness, is a deterrent when you're talking about mental wellness. So,
Right.
great point.
Excuse me, doctor, I have a question. And this question is directly from your co-producer on the West Coast.
Okay.
So, in some of the work that I do in mentoring and coaching people in my work, I actually had a conversation today with a young woman who has really been isolated during the pandemic. She's claustrophobic and so unable to work, unable to go to her doctor's visits, hasn't been able to get the kind of treatment that she's looking for via telehealth, specifically eye doctor appointments. And so I'm asking if there are any sort of tools you can provide to us who want to coach our family members or our mentees or our employees, even about getting to the resources to get to the tools that may help them with the claustrophobia. So, one of the things that she said to me today was, you have to have all these triggers with a person. You have to live through your triggers of claustrophobia to get to the other side of it. And so I can't do it. So what's the point of starting a process that's not going to end well? And so I found myself in a circle with her going around and around. But I really just want to support and encourage looking for tools. So I need coaching around coaching that. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who may be with a family member or a friend um, who could use some sort of tools around coaching,
Mhm.
And
supporting
it's
people.
yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, I think that's a general question, maybe not just for claustrophobia, but how do you approach loved ones or people that you're with who may have challenges and are having a hard time getting help for them?
Right. Well, uh, the phobia question, and any phobia or um, I guess fear based kind of debilitating issue, will take time and patience and time and patience. However, um, one of the things that I'm able to teach staff who work with young people is a trauma informed approach. So it's not trauma informed care. We're not going to ask them to do therapy, but so this would work with families who are trying to help other family members or mentees also. And so the premise behind a trauma informed approach is, instead of asking what's wrong with you, what happened, how did you get to this point, and how can I help? You need buy-in from the person you're trying to help. Or you, if you're working more or harder than the one who needs assistance, you will burn yourself out and they won't move. So the the questions with what happened show that you're curious and not blaming them for whatever they find themselves afraid of or um, distressed about. And then the how can I help means they need to give it some thought as to what they need, and then you can help. Either you can or you can't, but at least once you know what the need is, you can say, um, "Oh, I'm able to assist with that," or I'm not. I don't know much about that, but I know somebody who can." Once we identify what the need is, then the work becomes easier. But you still need some buy-in from the client or the one who's seeking assistance.
Yeah, I
Excuse
think
me,
those are
doctor.
great points.
We have a question coming from Trina Williams. Is it okay to regularly regularly retreat to my room and have a glass of wine to distress from a house of adults? I'm sorry.
You need help
Don't.
with that? A household of adults who don't pull their own weight instead of going off. Wine is therapy. What say you, Dr. Felderborn?
Don't judge me, as my daughter would say. Um, well, what's regular? So be careful. The highest increase in, I won't say alcoholism, but increase in number of drinks during this COVID period has been by women who increased from 3 drinks a week to over 7.
Wow.
So yeah, in moderation. I can't, I'm not going to generalize on that one because I don't know the history or who else might be listening and may have a more of a challenging struggle with a glass of wine. So if you can limit it, I don't see a problem, all things being equal. Um, but yeah, trying to deal with those in your house, self care. And if that's your form of self care, take care of yourself.
And as we wrap up, maybe you could leave us now that we're moving into 2021 and a lot
Mhm.
of people have been making New Year's resolutions. Maybe you could give us some good self care strategies to keep us from internalizing the craziness around us
Mhm.
and to unplug and reinforce our own wellness and our own mental wellness.
Huh. Um, this season we're in, um, with the multiple pandemics going on, stress is probably at the top of everyone's list. I don't think there's anyone who has not felt stressed out, overstressed um, during this time. And so self care is at the top. Um, and in that stress space, though, we jump to kind of a fight or flight, and it's not good to stay um, in that space day after day after day after day. So one of the first things you want to do, or like I guess a set of strategies, is learning to calm. And this is something I would try to incorporate daily, as a daily practice. Just build it into your routine. But when you're feeling stressed or upset or whatever the emotion is, notice it, name it, say it. I'm feeling stressed this morning. I'm feeling great, happy, energized this morning. Um, then practice one of the things of calming your nervous system if you're finding yourself stressed. That could be moving. Try to work in 20 minutes of movement. Go for a walk. Get some fresh air. Um, cuddle up with a partner or a pet. If someone is in your household, give them a hug. Ask for a hug. Trust me, as someone who's living single, um, you know, they didn't realize how much they appreciated hugs till they couldn't have one for 6 months. But so movement, eating well, sleeping well, a warm bath, a cup of tea. So things that are going to calm your nervous system. Check in with your thoughts. What am I thinking? My thoughts direct my feelings direct my thoughts. They're interchangeable either way. So think things that are positive, think things that are helpful, that are motivating. Um, a verse of scripture, an affirmation, something that's going to encourage and empower you. Um, and then um, start taking action on what you can control. If it's out of your control, that will only increase your stress by trying to fix it. So narrow it down to its least common denominator on what you can control. We cannot control what comes out of our crazy coworker's mouth, but I can control how I respond or don't, react or don't to what was said. So control what you can and move on. Um, Breathing is important. And so if you just pick one mindfulness technique that works for you, do that one.
Great. I think those are wonderful things. And one of my favorite things you said early on was realizing that it's other people's stuff and not to take on other people's stuff, which is, I think, another way of saying, you know, realize what you can control,
Right.
which is how you react to it. Thank you so much for being here. The hour
Sure.
has sped by, and you've added so much to it. I hope that everybody takes away at least one positive thing to help to unplug. One of the things we could have said too was also control your access to the news and social media. Put yourself on
Yes, yes, yes.
a strict diet, right? And increase those things that are good or positive. Reading a book, listening to music, substitute listening to the news with those positive things. But I hope everyone takes away at least one positive thing. Um, this has been a really great show. Any of the questions that you might have had that weren't answered, I'll get to them in the chat later on. And we'll be back next Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern, YouTube and Facebook. Tomorrow morning, you can catch me on the Russ Parr Morning Show, where I am at 9:35 a.m. every Tuesday morning, bringing you medical and health updates. So thanks again. And until I see you, remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.